Good afternoon. It's a hard act to follow after that lunch. And I'm not going to define Diapraxis because I couldn't find it on Google either. The Pope and the Mufti met in relation to the European Muslims. And for the benefit of everybody, I'm still telling a joke. So when they met together, the idea was that in fact the Muslims have to decide whether they're going to live peacefully in Europe or not. And so this meeting was to decide whether the Muslims would do so. So when they came together, they realized that in fact there was a language barrier and they couldn't speak to each other, so there was a lot of sign language going on. And so during the session, the Pope put his finger up and the Mufti immediately put his finger down, and the Pope went 3 and the Muslim went 1. The Pope pulled out some bread and the Mufti the apple. And they shook hands and left home. Seemingly everything was fine. So the Pope is now explaining this to the European Christians around in Europe to explain what in fact had happened and what these sign languages may have meant. The operative word is may have meant. And the Pope said that I put my finger up and said that God is the same in heaven. And it seems like that the Mufti said that we are all made of earth when he put his finger down. And when I said, when the Pope said that I put my finger up to say to that we only differ in Trinity, it seems like that the Mufti said, but we still believe ultimately in oneness of God. And so I said to him, by taking my bread out, the salvation is in Jesus. And he took the apple out, said that we are all Adam's children. It seems like they were very wonderful answers, so they will stay in Europe. But the Mufti, he went to the European Muslims, and this is how he explained. He said, the Pope said, we will not leave one roof standing up for you, and you have to leave. And I said to him, not one of us are going to leave, and we're staying right here. And the Pope said, I'm giving you 3 days. And I said to him, no, one of us will leave in any one day. So he took his lunch out and I took my lunch out, and we had a wonderful ending, so we all safe to stay. The moral of the story is that in this aspect of dialogue and diapraxis, language and understanding is extremely important. But today, I want to say that beyond my own experience, I think I would depart from the essential objective of what we were supposed to talk about to take it one step forward, because I don't want to stand here and talk about what I have done, but more so what I really need to do. Particularly, I have the ears, hopefully, of the rest of you here as we go back home into our own cities and organizations and indeed countries. That interreligious dialogue and interaction became a priority amongst faith communities in Australia and certainly around the world after 9/11. Something terribly awful and tragic brought us all together to stand for good. However, over years, and in particular in the last 5 years, standing together as people of faith has slipped away into the backgrounds of many of us. The bridges that we built over the last decade or so, in fact, remain strong. That's my opinion. But screws are coming loose. I see 3 major elements that are weakening the glue of society, and that glue is trust with each other, and people of faith need to stand together to revitalize this trust. I want to submit to you 3 negative forces that we must continue to together address and change. These 3 negative forces always exist, in fact, hindering the building of and maintaining bridges, and each of them unfortunately strengthen the other. Thank God for my iPad, it still has battery. Firstly, the first force is the anti-religious rhetoric, and I want to preempt in the last few minutes of my talk here. I didn't want to end our conference in some nice fluffy love way, but in a very firm love way, that we move from here together to stand together to do more and not simply only become complacent in what we have in fact achieved. And thank you, all of you, for standing first and foremost for goodness on earth, and indeed for my Muslim brethren and sisters around the world who have been on the receiving end for many unfortunate reasons. So the first force that we need to deal with is the anti-religious rhetoric. That in the 7th century, one of the scholars of Islam, Sufyan al-Thawri, defined what extremism was. And he says that extremism is the fear and hate of the other which defines the otherness and therefore yourself. So firstly, from the Muslim extremist perspective, the hate of the other defines myself as a strong believer is in fact extremism. Increasingly so in Australia and around the globe, anti-Islamic rhetoric equals good Australia. But Islam is not alone in a rising vociferous language against religions, and we all know that it starts with one of us. The second force, and that's the force of the bad news culture. Today, the general population is surrounded by news which are bad. The fact is that there is a lot of good, and in fact there is more good than bad on this earth at the public and social level. The power of good and good news is that they are healing in themselves, and we have a responsibility and we have the power to be able to share good news. The G20 summit, the economic growth plans, they are good news, is in fact milked all the way to the bank, if I could say it. But religion plays a serious social cohesion role. It builds bridges, it builds real bridges, it gives people genuine meaning, and these are good news to be shared if not milked. And third force, the powers of bad news and the powers of breaking good news. Firstly, the government. We have to stand and say that in fact our governments are not playing a positive role in sharing the good news and developing a positive society. When, for example, my own Prime Minister, Mr. Abbott, made time to convey to the masses that he is confronted by the Muslim woman's burqa, yet barely batted an eyelid regarding the confrontation with Ebola, I'm worried. I wonder why he is and other politicians are more infatuated with women's clothing rather than something like Ebola. Secondly, institutions. As part of building bridges, we need more empirical data, as we have seen just now, and thank you very much to Scotland Institute to do so, that Diapraxis through inter-religious collaboration is a reality. In Australia, just in the last 5 years, there are more academic papers in radicalization than in inter-religious positive action that actually exists. And we need to do more papers that in fact shares an empirical way the good that is happening. And thirdly, the media. I wonder if you are present here, and if you are, how you will report what has been happening in this summit. Whilst the narrative is changing to include mainstream religious voices, and I thank many of them in the media that when the latest raids happened in Sydney that you gave the voices to the mainstream, the media still inserts the footage of ISIS every single time we speak about the truth about Islam. It's quite interesting that we can say something so positive, but the background pictures continue to be the pictures of ISIS, which I prefer to call Daesh, which is not necessarily anything to do with any state or Islam. We also need the media to be in fact questioned in public forums like this. I was really hoping that in fact there would be one here for the media to be building bridges with them. The building of bridges requires constant maintenance, and whilst tragedy often gives life to positive action, we as a community of people of faith must sustain our collective message beyond the bad times. We need to be more responsive to the moment than reactive to the moment of tragedy. And lastly, as a community of religions, we must have greater effort to not only stand together in common word, but also in the diapraxis of collective positive action, and not only in humanitarian services, but also in arts. And I want to acknowledge the work of Dr. Helen Summers in this regard, the academic world, as well as social governance, that we actually stand together in relation to policies that bring the voices of the people of faith of this land and globally. We need to move beyond dialogue of words into the diapraxis of collaborative action. In the beginning, there was the word, but it was never meant to be the end. Thank you very much.